My name is Fanny, and I'm 58 years old. I've been sitting in this little house I built with my own hands for the past 30 years, thinking about how one sentence can change everything. You know, when you raise a child alone, you think you know them inside and out. You think the love you pour into them will come back to you when you need it most. But sometimes the people closest to your heart can surprise you in ways that cut deeper than any stranger ever could. I never imagined that the son I sacrificed everything for would look me in the eye and call me a nobody. But maybe that moment was exactly what I needed to remember who I really was. Before I share this story with you, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of people who believe in standing up for ourselves. Because sometimes the most painful lessons teach us the most powerful truths about self-respect. Now let me tell you about the day I decided to show my son what a nobody could really do. I became a widow when I was 28 years old. My husband David died in a truck accident on Interstate 75, leaving me alone with our 3-year-old son Marcus. I remember standing in that hospital hallway holding Marcus's tiny hand, knowing that everything I thought my life would be had just disappeared in an instant. The insurance money barely covered the funeral costs. I had no college degree, no career, and no family nearby to help. But I had Marcus, and I made a promise to myself that night that he would never feel the absence of his father in terms of opportunity or love. I worked 3 jobs to make ends meet. During the day, I cleaned offices downtown. At night, I worked as a nurse's aide at the county hospital. On weekends, I sold homemade cookies and candy at the farmer's market. Marcus spent his afternoons at Mrs. Patterson's house next door, and I paid her what I could for watching him. When Marcus turned 7, he needed glasses. The eye exam and frames cost $200 that I didn't have. So I sold my wedding ring, the only valuable thing I owned. I told Marcus that Daddy's love was now helping him see clearly, and he smiled so big that the sacrifice felt worth it. High school brought new challenges. Marcus was smart, really smart, and his teacher said he could get into any engineering program in the country if his grades stayed high. But he needed tutoring in advanced calculus, and the tutor cost $60 a week. I picked up a 4th job cleaning houses on my days off from the hospital. When Marcus graduated valedictorian, I cried in the audience, not just from pride, but from exhaustion. I was 46 years old and felt like I was 70. But watching him walk across that stage, knowing he had earned a full scholarship to Georgia Tech, made every sleepless night worth it. College years were different. Marcus called less often, which I understood. He was building his own life, making new friends, discovering who he was outside of our little bubble. When he graduated with his engineering degree, I drove the 4 hours to Atlanta to watch him receive his diploma. He seemed embarrassed when I cheered too loudly, but I didn't care. This was our victory. Marcus found a good job at a consulting firm in Atlanta. He rented a nice apartment and started making more money than I had ever dreamed of. For the first time in 20 years, I allowed myself to imagine what my own life might look like now that he was independent. Maybe I could cut back to just 2 jobs. Maybe I could finally fix the leaky roof that I had been patching with tarp for 3 years. But something began to change in Marcus around his 26th birthday. His visits home became shorter and less frequent. Our phone conversations felt rushed, distracted. When I asked about his life, his answers became vague. He mentioned dating someone named Sarah, but he seemed reluctant to talk about her in detail. I first met Sarah on a rainy Thursday evening in November. Marcus had called that morning to say they were driving up for dinner. I spent the entire day cleaning the house and preparing his favorite meal pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the same dish I had made for his birthday every year since he was little. When they arrived, I understood immediately why Marcus had seemed nervous about introducing us. Sarah stepped out of a brand new BMW, wearing clothes that probably cost more than I made in a month. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her smile polite but cold. "Mom, this is Sarah," Marcus said, and I noticed he didn't quite meet my eyes. "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Johnson," Sarah said, shaking my hand briefly. Her grip was limp, and she pulled away quickly as if my touch might somehow contaminate her. During dinner, Sarah barely touched the food I had spent hours preparing. She made small comments about the house needing updates and asked pointed questions about my job at the hospital. "How interesting that you never went back to school," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It must be difficult to advance without proper credentials." Marcus sat quietly through these exchanges, occasionally clearing his throat, but never defending me or redirecting the conversation. I watched my confident, accomplished son become someone I barely recognized, reduced to nervous glances and uncomfortable silence. After they left, I found myself standing in my kitchen staring at Sarah's untouched plate. She had eaten maybe 3 bites of the meal I had prepared with such care. The carrots I had cut into perfect rounds sat cold and abandoned, and somehow that felt like a metaphor for everything that was about to change. Over the next few months, Marcus's calls became even less frequent. When I did hear from him, the conversations felt strained. He started making comments about my house, suggesting that maybe I should consider updating my living situation. He mentioned that Sarah's family lived in a gated community with a golf course and said things like, "Mom, you might really benefit from expanding your social circle." The changes were subtle but constant. Where Marcus used to ask about my health and work, now he talked primarily about his own life and career. Where he used to remember our family traditions, now he seemed to view them as outdated obligations. The son who used to call me every Sunday stopped calling altogether unless I called him first. Mrs. Patterson noticed the change too. One afternoon while I was working in my garden, she came over and said, "Fanny, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but that boy of yours seems different since he started dating that girl. I've seen this before. Some people get ideas above their raising." I defended Marcus, of course. I told Mrs. Patterson that he was just adjusting to a new relationship, that Sarah came from a different background, and he was trying to bridge 2 worlds. But deep down, her words echoed something I had been trying not to acknowledge. My son was changing, and not in ways that honored the sacrifices that had brought him to where he was. The final straw came when Marcus called to tell me he wouldn't be coming home for Thanksgiving. "Sarah's family has this big tradition," he explained, his voice distant and apologetic. "It's important to her that I'm there." I spent Thanksgiving alone for the first time since David died. I cooked a small turkey anyway out of habit and ate dinner watching old home videos of Marcus as a child. In one video, he's about 5 years old, hugging me and saying, "Mommy, when I grow up, I'm going to take care of you forever and ever." I turned off the television and went to bed early. Christmas brought another disappointment. Marcus and Sarah went skiing in Colorado with her family instead of coming home. I received a generic greeting card in the mail with a photo of them on the slopes, both smiling and tan, looking like they belonged in a magazine. New Year's passed without a phone call. When I finally heard from Marcus in mid-January, he sounded different again. More confident, but also more distant. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe it's time you considered downsizing. That house is getting too big for just you, and the maintenance costs must be overwhelming." The suggestion stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. The house did need repairs I couldn't afford. The furnace was on its last legs, the kitchen appliances were from the 1980s, and the roof leaked in 3 places. But this house was where Marcus had grown up. It was where he had taken his first steps, where I had helped him with homework at the kitchen table, where we had celebrated every birthday and Christmas for 25 years. "This is my home, Marcus," I said quietly. "I know, Mom, but think practically. You could get a nice apartment, maybe closer to your work. Sarah and I have been looking at some senior living communities that are really quite nice." Senior living communities. At 57 years old, my son thought I belonged in a retirement home. The conversation ended awkwardly with Marcus promising to look into some options for me. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around me. Every creak and sigh of these walls held memories of the life I had built for us. In February, Marcus announced his engagement. He called on a Tuesday evening, his voice bright with excitement that felt forced. "Sarah said yes," he told me, and I could hear her laughing in the background. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice. "When is the wedding?" "We're thinking October. Sarah's parents want to host it at their country club. It's going to be beautiful." I waited for him to ask about my involvement in the planning, about my ideas for the ceremony, about whether I had thoughts on flowers or music or any of the things mothers and sons typically discuss when planning a wedding. The invitation never came. Instead, over the next several months, I heard about wedding plans secondhand. Marcus would mention details in passing during our infrequent phone calls. The dress cost $8,000. The flowers alone were budgeted at $5,000. The reception would have a live jazz band and a 7-course dinner. I never asked how much the wedding cost, but I did some quick math based on the details Marcus shared. It was more money than I had made in the past 3 years combined. 3 weeks before the wedding, Marcus called to give me the final details. "The ceremony starts at 4, he said. Cocktails at 5:30, dinner at 7. "Should I arrive early to help with anything?" I asked. There was a pause. "Oh, that's okay, Mom. Sarah's family has everything handled." The wedding was beautiful in the way that only unlimited money can make something beautiful. The country club was magnificent with manicured gardens and crystal chandeliers. I wore my best dress, a navy blue outfit I had bought on sale 2 years earlier, and felt immediately out of place among the designer gowns and expensive jewelry of the other guests. I was seated at table 12 near the back of the reception hall. The people at my table were polite but distant, mostly distant relatives of Sarah's family who didn't know me and didn't seem particularly interested in conversation. From my seat, I had to crane my neck to see the head table where Marcus and Sarah sat with her parents and the wedding party. During the reception, Marcus gave a speech thanking all the people who had supported him and Sarah in their journey together. He thanked Sarah's parents for welcoming him into their family. He thanked his college friends for their friendship. He thanked his coworkers for their mentorship. He never mentioned me. I sat at table 12, clapping politely, feeling invisible in a room full of people celebrating my son. The woman next to me leaned over and asked, "How do you know the couple?" "I'm Marcus's mother," I said. She looked surprised. "Oh, I didn't realize his family was here. Sarah mentioned that Marcus didn't have much family." I excused myself and went to the ladies' room where I locked myself in a stall and cried quietly for 5 minutes. Then I washed my face, fixed my makeup, and returned to table 12 to finish celebrating my son's wedding, like the stranger I had apparently become. The first year of Marcus's marriage brought new challenges and new disappointments. He and Sarah moved into a beautiful house in an upscale subdivision complete with a 3-car garage and a swimming pool. Marcus sent me photos, and I marveled at how far my son had come from the little boy who used to help me clip coupons at the kitchen table. But with their new lifestyle came new attitudes. When I visited for the first time, Sarah gave me a tour that felt more like a real estate showing than a family visit. She pointed out the granite countertops, the hardwood floors, the professional landscaping. "We really believe in investing in quality," she said with an emphasis on "we" that somehow excluded me from their world of good decisions and financial wisdom. During that visit, Sarah made several comments about my appearance and lifestyle that cut deeper than she probably intended, or maybe exactly as deep as she meant them to. "Fanny, have you ever considered updating your hairstyle?" she asked while we were sitting in her pristine living room. "There are some wonderful salons that cater to women in your age group." When I complimented their beautiful home, Sarah said, "Thank you. We really believe that your environment reflects your priorities. Marcus has learned so much about the importance of presentation since we've been together." I brought them a housewarming gift, a handmade quilt that had taken me 3 months to complete. I had worked on it during my breaks at the hospital, carefully choosing colors that would complement the photos Marcus had sent me of their living room. Sarah accepted it with a tight smile and said, "How thoughtful. We'll have to find somewhere special to put this." I never saw the quilt again during any of my subsequent visits. I suspected it was packed away in a closet somewhere too homemade and humble for their carefully curated aesthetic. Marcus seemed oblivious to these slights, or perhaps he had learned to ignore them. When Sarah made her pointed comments, he would change the subject or suddenly remember something he needed to do in another room. My confident, protective son had become someone who avoided conflict even when that conflict involved defending his own mother. The visits became less frequent and more uncomfortable. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying not to say or do anything that might embarrass Marcus or offend Sarah's sensibilities. I started declining their invitations for dinner, preferring to see Marcus alone for coffee when he had time. But even those solo visits with my son felt different. Marcus talked mostly about work, about his investments, about the places he and Sarah traveled. He seemed to have developed opinions about things like wine and art and cuisine that felt borrowed from Sarah's world rather than organically his own. One afternoon in late spring, Marcus came by my house for what I thought would be a casual visit. Instead, he walked through my home with a critical eye, making notes on his phone about things that needed repair or replacement. "Mom, this house is falling apart," he said, standing in my kitchen and looking at the water stain on the ceiling from the latest roof leak. "You can't keep living like this." "It's not that bad," I said defensively. "I've been meaning to fix the roof." "With what money?" he asked, and his tone was gentle but condescending. "Mom, you're almost 60 years old. You can't keep working 3 jobs and trying to maintain a house this size. It's not practical." He was right, of course. The house did need thousands of dollars in repairs that I didn't have, but his clinical assessment of my life, delivered in the same tone he might use to discuss a business problem with a client, made me feel small and foolish. "What do you suggest?" I asked. "Sarah and I have been looking at some options for you," he said, pulling out his phone to show me a website. "There are some really nice assisted living communities that are much more affordable than you might think. You'd have your own apartment, but there would be people around to help with maintenance and meals." Assisted living. At 58 years old, my son thought I needed assisted living. I looked at the photos on his phone. Clean, sterile apartments with beige carpets and generic furniture. A dining hall where residents ate together at assigned times. Activity rooms with puzzles and crafts designed to keep elderly minds occupied. "Marcus," I said carefully, "I'm not ready for that." "I know it's a big change," he said, "but think about how much easier your life would be. No more worrying about repairs or yard work or any of that stress." "This house is my home," I said. "It's where you grew up." Marcus looked around the kitchen with what seemed like distaste. "I know, Mom, but holding on to the past isn't helping your future. Sarah thinks—" "What does Sarah think?" I asked. "She thinks you're too independent for your own good. She worries that your pride is keeping you from making smart decisions." My pride. The woman who had never worked a day in a job that required her to get her hands dirty was worried about my pride. By summer, the financial pressure had become overwhelming. The roof leaked badly during a June thunderstorm, soaking the carpet in my bedroom and ruining several photo albums full of pictures of Marcus growing up. The furnace died completely in July, leaving me without hot water for 3 weeks while I tried to figure out how to pay for repairs. I swallowed my pride and called Marcus for help. "Honey, I hate to ask, but I'm in a real bind here. The furnace needs to be replaced, and the estimate is $3,500. I don't have anywhere else to turn." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mom, Sarah, and I have been talking about this. We think maybe this is the universe's way of telling you it's time to make a change." "I just need help with the furnace," I said. "I'm not asking for charity. I can pay you back." "When?" he asked, and his tone was not unkind, but it was businesslike. "Mom, you're barely making ends meet as it is. How are you going to pay me back $3,500? It was a fair question that I couldn't answer. "I'll figure something out," I said. "I have a better idea," Marcus said. "Why don't you stay with Sarah and me for a few weeks while we look at some of those communities I showed you? You could get a fresh perspective on your options." I stayed in my house without hot water rather than accept his offer. Mrs. Patterson let me use her shower, and I heated water on the stove for washing dishes. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than feeling like a charity case in my son's perfect house. The final blow came in August when Marcus called to tell me he and Sarah were going to Europe for 2 weeks. "It's our anniversary trip," he explained. "Sarah found this amazing deal on a tour of Italy and France." "That sounds wonderful," I said, genuinely happy that he was able to do things I had never dreamed of. "The crazy thing is," Marcus continued, "the trip costs almost exactly what Sarah's parents gave us as a wedding gift. It's like they planned it perfectly." Sarah's parents had given them money for their anniversary trip, money that could have fixed my furnace, repaired my roof, and covered my living expenses for 6 months. Instead, it was going toward gelato in Rome and wine tastings in Tuscany. I wasn't jealous exactly. I was proud that Marcus had married into a family that could provide those opportunities for him, but I was hurt that my son could accept thousands of dollars from his in-laws for a vacation while his mother lived without hot water and slept under a tarp when it rained. That night, I made a decision that felt both desperate and necessary. I called the bank and inquired about a home equity loan. The house was paid off, a result of 30 years of careful budgeting and sacrifice. It was worth about $150,000, enough to secure a significant loan that could cover the repairs and give me some financial breathing room. The loan officer was encouraging. "You've got excellent equity," she said. "We could easily approve you for $50,000 at a very reasonable rate." $50,000 felt like a fortune. I could fix everything that was wrong with the house and still have money left over for emergencies. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful about my financial future. But there was a catch. As a 58-year-old woman with a modest income, I needed a cosigner to guarantee the loan. The bank suggested I ask a family member, someone with good credit and steady income, who could vouch for my ability to repay. I knew exactly who that person would have to be. Calling Marcus to ask him to co-sign the loan was one of the hardest phone calls I had ever made. I practiced what I would say, trying to frame it as a business proposition rather than a plea for help. "Marcus, I've found a solution to my financial problems," I said when he answered. "The bank is willing to give me a home equity loan to fix everything that needs fixing. I just need someone with good credit to co-sign." "How much money are we talking about?" he asked. $50,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but the house is worth much more than that, and the monthly payments would actually be lower than what I'm spending now on repairs and utilities. Marcus was quiet for a long time. "Mom, that's a significant financial commitment. If something happened and you couldn't make the payments—" "Nothing will happen," I said quickly. "I'll keep working, and the payments are very manageable. This would actually make my life easier, not harder." "I need to discuss this with Sarah," he said. The fact that he needed his wife's permission to help his mother should have been my first warning sign, but I was so focused on solving my immediate problems that I ignored the larger implications of his response. 3 days later, Marcus called back. "Sarah and I talked it over, and we're willing to help," he said. "But we want this to be a real business arrangement. We'll co-sign the loan, but we want you to sign an agreement that if you can't make the payments, you'll sell the house and move into one of those communities we looked at." It wasn't ideal, but it was better than losing my house to disrepair. I agreed to their terms, and we met at the bank the following week to sign the papers. Marcus arrived in a suit, looking every inch the successful businessman. He had brought a folder full of documents that Sarah had apparently prepared, outlining the terms of our agreement in detail. As we sat across from the loan officer, I felt less like his mother and more like a risky client he was reluctantly agreeing to help. The loan was approved, and I walked out of the bank with a check for $50,000. For the first time in years, I felt financially secure. I could fix my roof, replace my furnace, update my kitchen, and still have money in savings for emergencies. But the victory felt hollow. My son had helped me, but only after consulting with his wife, and only after creating a legal framework that protected him from my potential failures. The son I had raised to be generous and compassionate had become someone who viewed even family relationships through the lens of financial risk management. Still, I was grateful. I hired contractors to fix the roof and replace the furnace. I bought a new refrigerator and had the kitchen repainted. For the first time in years, my house felt like a home instead of a constant source of stress and worry. The monthly loan payments were manageable, just as I had promised. I continued working my 2 remaining jobs and easily covered the mortgage, utilities, and living expenses. Everything was going according to plan, but Marcus's behavior toward me didn't improve with my improved circumstances. If anything, he seemed to resent the fact that I had needed help at all. His visits became even less frequent, and when he did come by, he inspected the improvements with a critical eye, as if looking for evidence that I had wasted his investment. Everything changed on a cold Tuesday morning in March. I woke up feeling dizzy and nauseous, symptoms I attributed to working too many double shifts at the hospital. But when I tried to get out of bed, my legs gave way and I collapsed on the bedroom floor. Mrs. Patterson found me 3 hours later when she came to check on me after noticing that I hadn't picked up my newspaper. She called an ambulance, and I spent the next 4 days in the hospital being treated for severe dehydration and exhaustion. The doctor was blunt about my condition. "Mrs. Johnson, your body is telling you to slow down. You can't keep working 60-hour weeks at your age. You need rest, better nutrition, and less stress." I called Marcus from my hospital bed to let him know what had happened. He seemed genuinely concerned, which gave me hope that maybe my health scare would remind him of what really mattered. "I'll be there as soon as I can," he promised. "But When Marcus arrived at the hospital 2 days later, he wasn't alone. Sarah was with him, and she immediately took charge of the conversation. "Fanny, this is exactly what we were worried about," Sarah said, settling into the chair beside my bed as if she belonged there. "You've been pushing yourself too hard for too long." Marcus nodded in agreement. "Mom, the doctor says you need to eliminate stress from your life. Maybe this is the wake-up call you needed." "I'm fine," I said, though I clearly wasn't. "I just need to take better care of myself." "You need more than that," Sarah said. "You need a complete lifestyle change. Marcus and I have been researching some options for you." She pulled out a folder, the same type of organized presentation Marcus had brought to the bank. Inside were brochures for assisted living facilities, detailed financial analyses, and what appeared to be a timeline for transitioning me out of my house. "We think Sunset Manor would be perfect for you," Sarah explained, showing me glossy photos of a facility that looked more like a hotel than a nursing home. "They have an excellent medical staff, organized activities, and the residents we spoke with seem very happy." "I don't need assisted living," I said. "I had one bad day. That doesn't mean I can't take care of myself." Marcus leaned forward, his face serious. "Mom, you collapsed in your own house and lay on the floor for 3 hours. What if Mrs. Patterson hadn't found you? What if something worse had happened?" It was a valid concern, but the way he presented it felt like an attack on my competence rather than genuine worry for my safety. "I can be more careful," I said. "Maybe get one of those emergency alert systems." "That's not enough," Sarah said. "Fanny, I know this is hard to hear, but living alone at your age, in your financial situation, it's just not sustainable. The stress of trying to maintain that house and work those jobs is what put you in this hospital." "My financial situation is fine," I said. "The loan payments are manageable." Sarah exchanged a look with Marcus that I didn't like. "Actually, Mom, we need to talk about that," Marcus said. "With your medical bills and the time you'll need to take off work to recover, your finances are going to be tighter than ever." He was right, of course. The hospital bill alone would cost me thousands of dollars, even with insurance. And I would need to take at least 2 weeks off work, which meant no income during my recovery. "We're worried about your ability to keep up with the loan payments," Sarah said gently. "If you default on that loan, Marcus could lose his house. We could lose everything we've worked for." The weight of that responsibility settled on my chest like a stone. In my desperation to save my own home, I had put my son's financial security at risk. If I couldn't work, couldn't make the payments, Marcus would be liable for the full $50,000. "What are you suggesting?" I asked quietly. "We think you should sell the house now while you're healthy enough to make clear decisions," Marcus said. "You could pay off the loan, use the remaining money to secure a place at Sunset Manor, and eliminate all this stress from your life. And from our lives too," Sarah added with a small smile that didn't soften the blow of her words. I looked at my son, the little boy I had raised to be kind and protective, and saw a stranger who was more concerned about his financial liability than his mother's well-being. The realization was more painful than any physical ailment. "I need time to think about this," I said. "Of course," Marcus said, standing up and kissing my forehead in a gesture that felt performative rather than genuine. "But don't take too long, Mom. The longer you wait, the harder this decision is going to be." After they left, I lay in my hospital bed staring at the ceiling. Outside my window, I could see the parking lot where Marcus and Sarah were probably sitting in their luxury car planning my future without me. For the first time since David died, I felt completely alone in the world. I was discharged from the hospital on a Friday afternoon with strict instructions to rest and gradually return to my normal activities. Mrs. Patterson picked me up and helped me get settled back into my house, which felt both familiar and foreign after my stay in the sterile hospital environment. The medical bills arrived within a week. Even with insurance, I owed over $8,000 for my 4-day stay. The payment plan the hospital offered would add another $300 to my monthly expenses money I didn't have without working overtime shifts that the doctor had specifically told me to avoid. I tried to return to work the following Monday, but my supervisor took one look at me and sent me home. "Fanny, you look like a ghost," she said kindly. "Take another week. Your health is more important than this job." Another week without income meant another week closer to missing my first loan payment. The due date was circled on my calendar like a countdown to disaster. I swallowed my pride and called Marcus on Wednesday evening. Honey, I hate to ask, but I'm in trouble with these medical bills. Is there any way you could help me out with a small loan just until I get back on my feet? There was a pause that lasted too long. Mom, Sarah and I have been talking about this exact scenario. We're really concerned about your ability to handle your financial obligations. It's just temporary, I said. Once I'm back to work full-time, I can pay you back and keep up with everything else. When will that be? He asked. The doctor told you to reduce your work hours permanently. How are you going to make the loan payments on a reduced income? It was a question I couldn't answer because I hadn't figured it out yet myself. I'll find a way, I said weakly. Mom, I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your future. Sarah and I would like to come over this weekend to discuss some options. The way he said options made it clear that he wasn't talking about multiple choices. He was talking about the one choice he had already made for me. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, which seemed appropriate for what I suspected would be a difficult conversation. Marcus and Sarah arrived at noon, both dressed casually, but with the serious expressions of people about to deliver bad news. Sarah had brought another folder, this one even thicker than the previous ones. Fanny, we've done some extensive research into your situation. She began spreading papers across my kitchen table. Based on your current income, your medical expenses, and your age, we think there's really only one viable option. The papers included a financial analysis of my situation that was depressingly accurate brochures for Sunset Manor with pricing information highlighted and what appeared to be a timeline for selling my house and transitioning to assisted living. We've already spoken with a real estate agent, Marcus said. She thinks we could get $160,000 for the house in its current condition. After paying off the loan and the medical bills, you'd have about $90,000 left over. That's enough to secure a nice apartment at Sunset Manor with money left over for your ongoing expenses, Sarah added. You'd have medical care available 24 hours a day, organized meals, social activities. It would actually be a much better quality of life than what you have now. I looked around my kitchen at the table where Marcus had done his homework for 12 years, at the window where I had watched him play in the backyard, at the refrigerator covered with his childhood drawings that I had never taken down. This is my home, I said quietly. Mom, be practical, Marcus said, his voice taking on the patient tone he might use with a confused elderly person. This house is too big for you, too expensive to maintain, and too isolated. At Sunset Manor, you'd have people around all the time. You wouldn't have to worry about emergencies like what happened last week. What if I don't want to sell? I asked. Sarah leaned forward, her expression sympathetic but firm. Fanny, that's not really an option anymore. If you can't make the loan payments, Marcus loses his house. We lose everything we've worked for. You can't ask us to take that risk. The threat was delivered gently, but it was still a threat. Sell the house voluntarily or watch my son lose his home because of my financial failures. How long do I have to decide? I asked. The real estate market is good right now, Marcus said. We should move quickly to get the best price. I'd like to list the house within the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks to end 30 years of memories, to abandon the home I had built with my own hands and my own sacrifice. 2 weeks to accept that my son valued his financial security more than my autonomy. I need some time to process this, I said. Of course, Sarah said, gathering up the papers. But Fanny, dragging this out isn't going to make it easier. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is accept reality and move forward. After they left, I sat in my kitchen for hours watching the light change as afternoon turned to evening. I thought about all the times I had sat at this same table making difficult decisions about Marcus's future. Whether to spend money on his school clothes or pay the electric bill, whether to work an extra shift or stay home when he was sick, whether to sell my wedding ring or find another way to pay for his glasses. Every decision had been about putting his needs first, about sacrificing my own comfort for his opportunity. And now he was asking me to make one final sacrifice, to give up my home and my independence so that his comfort would remain intact. For the first time in 30 years, I wondered if I had raised my son wrong. Had I taught him that love meant endless sacrifice? Had I shown him that a mother's needs would always come second to everyone else's priorities? As I sat in the growing darkness of my kitchen, I realized that maybe it was time to teach him a different lesson. I spent the weekend researching my options, and what I found surprised me. The home equity loan documents that Sarah had prepared so carefully contained language that she had apparently not read as thoroughly as she thought. According to the contract, Marcus was indeed liable if I defaulted on the loan, but the liability was specifically tied to the value of the house itself. If I sold the house and used the proceeds to pay off the loan, his obligation ended completely. There was no personal liability beyond the collateral of the property. More importantly, I discovered that as the homeowner, I had the legal right to sell the property to anyone I chose for any price I deemed acceptable. The bank's only concern was receiving their $50,000. What happened to any money beyond that amount was entirely up to me. I made an appointment with a different real estate agent, one that Marcus and Sarah hadn't contacted. When I explained my situation, she was sympathetic and creative. "You have several options," she explained. "If you want to maximize your profit, we could list the house at fair market value and hope for the best. But if you want more control over the outcome, there are other approaches." She explained something called a strategic sale, where I could sell the house to a buyer of my choosing for the exact amount needed to pay off the loan and medical bills. Any buyer, for any reason. As long as the debts were satisfied, the transaction would be legally valid. "Do you have anyone in mind?" she asked. I did, actually. Mrs. Patterson had mentioned several times over the years that she wished she could buy my house for her nephew, who was starting a family and looking for a home in a good neighborhood. The house was worth $160,000, but I could legally sell it for $60,000 and accomplish exactly what Marcus claimed he wanted: pay off all my debts and eliminate his financial risk. Of course, selling the house for $60,000 would leave me with no money for Sunset Manor or any other living arrangements. But that wasn't Marcus's problem, was it? He had made it very clear that his primary concern was protecting his own financial interests. I called Mrs. Patterson that evening and explained my situation. Her nephew was thrilled at the opportunity to buy a house in his price range, and Mrs. Patterson was happy to help me find a solution that didn't involve assisted living. "You can stay in my guest room as long as you need," she offered. "We'll figure out something permanent once you're back on your feet." The plan was simple and perfectly legal. I would sell the house to Mrs. Patterson's nephew for exactly the amount needed to pay off the loan and medical bills. Marcus would be completely free of any financial obligation. I would move in with Mrs. Patterson temporarily and figure out my next steps from there. But first, I wanted to give Marcus one more chance to remember who he used to be. I called him on Tuesday morning and asked if he could come over to discuss the house sale. "I've made a decision," I told him, "and I'd like to talk it through with you before I finalize anything." Marcus arrived that afternoon with Sarah, both of them looking relieved that I had apparently come to my senses about my living situation. "I'm glad you're being realistic about this, Mom," Marcus said as they settled into my living room. "I know it's not easy, but you're making the right choice. I've been thinking about what you said," I began carefully, "about how my financial problems affect your security. You're absolutely right. It's not fair for me to put your future at risk because of my situation." Sarah smiled approvingly. "It takes courage to admit when we need help," she said. "You should be proud of yourself for making such a mature decision." "I've found a buyer for the house," I continued. "Someone who can close quickly and pay enough to cover the loan and medical bills." Marcus leaned forward, interested. "That's great, Mom. How much are they offering?" "Exactly what I owe," I said. $60,000. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look that progressed from confusion to alarm to something approaching panic. "Mom, the house is worth $160,000, Marcus said slowly. "You can't sell it for $60,000. "Actually, I can," I replied calmly. "I checked with the lawyer. As long as the debts are satisfied, I can sell my house to anyone for any price I choose." "But what about Sunset Manor?" Sarah asked, her voice rising slightly. "How will you afford assisted living?" "I won't," I said simply. "I'll figure out something else." Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "Mom, this is crazy. You're talking about giving away $100,000 out of spite." "Spite?" I asked. "I thought I was solving your problem. You said you were worried about your financial risk. This eliminates that risk completely." "But it leaves you with nothing," Sarah protested. "That's not your concern, is it?" I said, still maintaining my calm tone. You made it very clear that your priority is protecting your own interests. This accomplishes that goal. Marcus sat back down, his face pale. Mom, I never meant for you to hurt yourself to help us. Didn't you? I asked. Because that's exactly what you've been asking me to do. Give up my home, my independence, my right to make decisions about my own life, all so that you can sleep better at night knowing you're not financially responsible for your mother's well-being. Sarah tried to interject, but I held up my hand to stop her. For 30 years, I sacrificed everything I wanted so that Marcus could have everything he needed. I worked 3 jobs, sold my jewelry, lived without heat, patched my roof with tarpaul so he could have opportunities I never dreamed of. And now, when I need help, the first thing he wants to do is eliminate his obligation to me. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. Mom, that's not how I meant it. Then how did you mean it? I asked, because from where I sit, it looks like you want me to disappear into an assisted living facility so you can go on with your life without worrying about your inconvenient mother. That's not true, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Prove it, I said. The house goes on the market tomorrow. You can either help me find a solution that preserves both my dignity and your security, or you can watch me sell it for $60,000 and figure out my own future. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it in a clear invitation for them to leave. You have 24 hours to decide what kind of son you want to be, I said. Choose wisely. Marcus called me at 6 o'clock the next morning, his voice shaky with exhaustion. Mom, Sarah and I talked all night. We want to work something out. I'm listening, I said. What if we paid your medical bills and helped with your monthly expenses so you could keep the house? We could set up an automatic payment system so you'd never have to worry about missing the loan payment. It was a reasonable offer, the kind of solution I had hoped for from the beginning. But something in his tone told me there was more to the conversation. What does Sarah think about that plan? I asked. There was a long pause. She thinks we should help you, but she wants some conditions. What kind of conditions? She wants you to sign a legal agreement that gives us power of attorney over your medical and financial decisions. She says if we're going to be financially responsible for you, we need to have some control over the situation. Power of attorney. They wanted to help me keep my house in exchange for the legal right to make my decisions for me. Anything else? I asked. She thinks you should consider having a live-in caregiver, someone who could help with daily tasks and make sure you're taking care of yourself. A babysitter. They wanted to install a babysitter to watch over me in my own home. And if I don't agree to these conditions, then we support whatever decision you make about the house, Marcus said, but I could hear the strain in his voice. I thought about the offer for exactly 10 seconds. No, I said. Mom, please be reasonable. I am being reasonable, I said. I'm being more reasonable than I've been in 30 years. I'm going to sell my house to Mrs. Patterson's nephew for $60,000. I'm going to pay off all my debts, and I'm going to solve my own problems without putting you at risk. Where will you live? He asked desperately. That's not your concern anymore, I said. You made it clear that you don't want the responsibility of helping me, so I'm removing that responsibility. I do want to help you, he protested, but I also have to think about Sarah and our future. You made your choice, I said. Now I'm making mine. I hung up the phone and called the real estate agent. Let's move forward with the sale, I told her. I want to close as soon as possible. The paperwork was surprisingly simple. Mrs. Patterson's nephew had already been approved for a $60,000 mortgage, and since the house was in good condition, thanks to the recent repairs, the inspection and appraisal moved quickly. Marcus called several times during the following week, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails about reconsidering my decision. Sarah sent a long email explaining how my actions were hurting not just Marcus, but their entire future together. I deleted the email without reading it completely. The closing was scheduled for the following Friday. On Thursday evening, Marcus showed up at my door without calling first. Mom, please don't do this, he said, and I was shocked to see that he had been crying. I know I made mistakes. I know I haven't been the son you deserved, but selling the house for $60,000 isn't going to fix anything. It's going to fix your financial liability, I said. Isn't that what you wanted? I wanted you to be safe and happy, he said. I wanted to find a solution that worked for everyone. Your version of a solution required me to give up everything that matters to me, I said. My home, my independence, my right to make decisions about my own life. That's not a solution. That's a surrender. Marcus sat down heavily on my front steps, his head in his hands. What do you want from me, Mom? Tell me what you want and I'll do it. It was a fair question, and I realized I had been so focused on what I didn't want that I hadn't clearly articulated what I did want. I want you to remember who you used to be, I said, sitting down beside him. I want you to remember the little boy who used to promise to take care of me when he grew up. I want you to remember that I'm not your financial liability or your burden to manage. I'm your mother. You are, he said quietly. And I've been a terrible son. You've been a son who forgot where he came from, I said. There's a difference. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the trees that I had planted when Marcus was in elementary school. What if Sarah doesn't like whatever solution we come up with? He asked finally. Then maybe you need to decide whether you're married to Sarah or to her opinions, I said. It was a harsh thing to say, but it was also true. Marcus had spent so much time trying to please his wife that he had forgotten his obligations to everyone else in his life. I love her, he said. I know you do, I said. But love shouldn't require you to abandon your family. So what happens now? He asked. Now you go home and decide what kind of man you want to be, I said. And tomorrow I sell my house and start over. At 58 years old, people have started over at worse ages and in worse circumstances, I said. I'll be fine. But even as I said it, I wasn't entirely sure it was true. The house sale closed on Friday afternoon at 2:30. Mrs. Patterson's nephew was thrilled to be getting such a beautiful home at a price he could afford, and I was relieved to be free of the debt that had been hanging over my head for months. I walked through the empty house one last time after the closing, remembering all the moments that had shaped my life within these walls. Marcus's first steps in the living room. Christmas mornings around the tree that used to stand by the front window. Quiet evenings when it was just the two of us working on homework at the kitchen table. Mrs. Patterson was waiting for me in her driveway when I locked the door for the final time. Come on, honey, she said, taking my arm. Let's get you settled. Her guest room was small but comfortable, and she had already cleared space in her closet for my clothes. It wasn't home, but it was a safe place to figure out what home would look like next. That evening, Marcus called. Mom, I heard the sale went through. Where are you staying? With Mrs. Patterson for now, I said. And after that, I'm still figuring that out. There was a long pause. Sarah and I had another long conversation, he said finally. Oh, she's not happy about this situation. She thinks you manipulated me into feeling guilty, and she doesn't want our finances tied up with your problems anymore. Then it sounds like my solution worked perfectly, I said. Mom, please. I want to help you find a permanent place to live. I want to make this right. How? I asked. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I'll figure something out. Without consulting Sarah, I asked. Another pause. I need to think about that. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding my life from scratch. I found a part-time job at a local library that offered health insurance and a pension plan. The pay was modest, but it was enough to cover basic expenses, and the work was more enjoyable than anything I had done in years. Mrs. Patterson and I settled into a comfortable routine. I helped with cooking and household tasks, and she provided companionship and wisdom that I hadn't realized I was missing. For the first time in years, I wasn't constantly worried about money or repairs or emergencies. Marcus called regularly, sometimes daily, trying to work up the courage to have the conversation he knew needed to happen. Sometimes Sarah was in the background and I could hear her comments about boundaries and enabling. Sometimes he called when she wasn't home, and those conversations were more honest and more painful. 3 weeks after the house sale, Marcus asked if he could take me to lunch. We met at a small restaurant that we used to go to when he was in high school, back when our relationship was simple and uncomplicated. I've been thinking about what you said, he began after we ordered, about remembering who I used to be. And I used to be someone who protected the people I loved. I used to be someone who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. You still could be, I said. Sarah thinks I should choose between her happiness and your approval, he said. She says I can't make everyone happy, so I need to prioritize my marriage. What do you think? I asked. Marcus looked out the window for a long time before answering. I think I married someone who doesn't understand what family means, and I think I've been so afraid of losing her that I lost myself instead. It was the most honest thing he had said to me in years. What are you going to do about it? I asked. I don't know, he said, but I know I can't keep living like this. I can't keep choosing my comfort over your dignity. It's not about comfort, I said. It's about remembering that love isn't a transaction. It's not something you earn by being convenient or undemanding. It's something you give freely, especially to family. I know, he said quietly, and I'm sorry it took me so long to remember that. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a beginning. For the first time in months, I felt like I was talking to my son instead of to Sarah's husband. Over the following weeks, Marcus began making small changes that showed me he was remembering who he used to be. He started calling me every Sunday the way he used to in college. He came by Mrs. Patterson's house to help with yard work and small repairs. He stopped asking Sarah's permission before making plans that involved me. The changes didn't come without consequences. Sarah became increasingly resentful of the time Marcus spent with me, and their arguments became more frequent and more heated. Marcus tried to include her in some of our activities, but she made it clear that she had no interest in building a relationship with me. The final confrontation came on a Sunday afternoon in November, almost exactly 1 year after I had first met Sarah. Marcus had come over to help Mrs. Patterson and me winterize her garden, and Sarah arrived unexpectedly to collect her husband. Marcus, we had plans today, she said, standing in Mrs. Patterson's driveway with her arms crossed. I've been waiting at home for 2 hours. I told you I was helping Mom today, Marcus replied, not looking up from the flower bed he was mulching. You didn't ask if I wanted to change our plans, Sarah said. You just decided that your mother's yard work was more important than spending time with your wife. It's not about importance, Marcus said, finally standing up to face her. It's about responsibility. And Mom is my responsibility too. Your responsibility is to your marriage, Sarah shot back. Your responsibility is to the life we're building together. What kind of life are we building if it doesn't include room for my family? Marcus asked. It was a fair question that Sarah clearly wasn't prepared to answer. She looked at me, then at Mrs. Patterson, then back at Marcus. I shouldn't have to compete with your mother for your attention, she said finally. You're not competing, Marcus said quietly. But you're asking me to choose, and that's not fair. Maybe it is time to choose, Sarah said, her voice getting louder. Maybe it's time to decide whether you're going to be a husband or a mama's boy. The silence that followed was deafening. Patterson excused herself and went inside, leaving the three of us standing in the driveway with 30 years of complicated family history hanging in the air between us. Sarah, Marcus said carefully, you're asking me to abandon my mother. I can't do that. I'm asking you to prioritize your marriage over her manipulations, Sarah replied. She sold her house for $60,000 out of spite, Marcus. She chose to make herself homeless rather than accept our help. That's not normal behavior. Our help came with conditions that would have stripped away her dignity and independence, Marcus said, and I was proud to hear him finally defend my decision. She didn't refuse help. She refused to be treated like a child. She is acting like a child, Sarah said, and you're enabling her. Marcus looked at his wife for a long moment, and I could see him making a decision that would change everything. No, he said simply. I'm finally acting like her son. Sarah stared at him in shock. What does that mean? It means I'm going to take care of my mother the way she took care of me, without conditions, without strings attached, without asking anyone's permission. Even if it ruins our marriage, Sarah asked. If taking care of my mother ruins our marriage, then maybe our marriage was already broken, Marcus replied. It was the bravest thing I had seen him do in years. Sarah got back in her car and drove away without another word. Marcus and I finished the yard work in silence, both of us processing what had just happened. Are you okay? I asked as we were putting away the tools. I will be, he said. I should have had that conversation a year ago. You had it when you were ready, I said. That's what matters. 3 months later, Marcus and Sarah divorced. She kept the house and most of their assets, but Marcus didn't seem to mind. He moved into a small apartment closer to Mrs. Patterson's house and started rebuilding his life around the values he had somehow lost along the way. We had dinner together every Wednesday and spent Sundays working on projects around Mrs. Patterson's house. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt the relationship that I thought I had lost forever. Marcus still had regrets about the way he had treated me, and I had moments of sadness about the years we had lost to misunderstandings and misplaced priorities. But we both learned that love isn't something you can take for granted, even with family. It's something you have to choose again and again, especially when choosing it is difficult. I never moved back into a house of my own. Mrs. Patterson and I became family in a way that neither of us had expected. Two women who had raised children alone and were now growing old together with dignity and companionship. Marcus often joked that he had gained a grandmother and I had gained a sister, and we were both richer for it. The experience taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to make their life easier at the expense of your own dignity. And sometimes the most powerful word in the English language isn't yes or please or even love. Sometimes it's no. I learned that being a good mother doesn't mean accepting disrespect or mistreatment, even from the child you love most in the world. It means teaching that child to value what they have, to honor the sacrifices that made their success possible, and to understand that love without respect is just expectation in disguise. Marcus learned that marriage should enhance your ability to love other people, not diminish it. He learned that a partner who asks you to choose between them and your family is asking you to choose between them and your own integrity. We both learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to remember what truly matters. Now, when people ask me about the day I sold my house for $60,000, I tell them it was the best investment I ever made. I didn't lose a house that day. I found my son. They say blood is thicker than water, but I've learned that respect is thicker than blood. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the lesson that love without respect is just expectation wearing a disguise. Sometimes you have to teach people how to value you by showing them what happens when they don't. What lessons have you learned from the difficult relationships in your own life? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family love and the courage it takes to demand the respect we all deserve. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that it's never too late to teach someone how to treat you properly. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no.